Now our opening speaker, MLA Annie McKitrick, is going to come up and give us opening remarks. First, a bio for Annie. She is an MLA for Sherwood Park and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Education. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Ecology from McGill and a Master's in Education and Diploma in Public Sector Management from University of Victoria. She is a community and social planner, and she was a school trustee and board chair and has worked in Southeast Asia. So please join me in giving a hand to MLA Annie McKitrick.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks for inviting me once again here. I remember coming here maybe a year or a year and a half ago. So I'm really delighted to come here today because I've worked very hard as an MLA around the community generation file, and I worked with a group of people like yourself. Every week we had a teleconference call with people involved in renewable energy, people involved in the co-op sector, people who were involved in the REAs, and I have to give credit to people like yourself in the community who, I don't want to use the word pestered, but who really worked hard to make sure that the government had the information and also that the government knew that there were people in the community who were interested in community generation. So a big thank you to all of you who may have had input on this file or who may have worked with people like Walter Hosley to make. In this conjunction to do this, the government has also increased the rates for solar rebates, and they continue to play an important role in helping encourage the adoption of solar. Since 2015, there has been over 3,000 installations in the province, so 3,000 new projects, you know. So, yeah. And I'm hoping that many of you benefited from one of the rebate programs or one from the incentives the government has put forward. This is one of a series of investments our government has made under the Climate Leadership Plan, funded by the carbon levy dollars as we continue supporting a recovery to robust energy economy, what it includes renewable energy, while ensuring the benefits are brought into our communities, resulting in local economic development and spin-off benefits for our cities, town, village, counties, and municipal districts, as well as the development of a cleaner and more diversified grid. So I wanted to end by saying I'm committed to seeing communities, cooperatives, developments, subdivisions build their own community generation project. And I think this is really great news for many of our communities, and it's going to provide a real opportunity for people to have more ownership over their electricity and to build the kind of energy project that they really believe in. So thank you, and I look forward to the presentation.
Thank you, Annie McKitrick, for those words. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Lorelei Hanson. A bit about Dr. Lorelei Hanson. Lorelei Hanson, my apologies, is an associate professor of environmental studies at the Basque University and a fellow with the Energy Futures Lab, a social learning lab focused on identifying innovation pathways to disrupt and transition Alberta's energy system. She is the editor of the recently published Public Deliberation on Climate Change, Lessons from Alberta Climate Dialogue, that evaluates the tensions, challenges, and opportunities that emerge when publics are convened to deliberate on wicked issues like climate change. In her free time, she practices permaculture and is slowly learning Spanish. Dr. Lorelei Hanson.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, and good evening, everyone. So tonight I'm going to start off our presentations by giving a very general kind of overview of community energy. I think looking through the audience that lots of you don't actually need this introduction, or you've heard parts of it, like Mikhail. So, but anyways, I'm not really going to draw on the research that I do on community energy, but I am involved, as has been mentioned, in doing some research with colleagues at Athabasca University, University of Alberta, and the University of Calgary, trying to really understand how groups that are involved in developing community energy projects, what are the challenges and the opportunities that they realize as they go through the process. And so I'm happy to kind of talk about that when we have our Q&A, but for right now, I'm just going to give you kind of a general overview of community energy. Okay, so as many of you are aware, in October of 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, released a special report, and in that they indicated that although we had seen 3 years of stabilized global greenhouse gas emissions, in 2017, and I would add again in 2018, we saw GHG levels increase. We've already seen an increase in global warming of over 1 degree Celsius, and 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and will likely reach 1.5 degrees Celsius sometime between 2030 and 2052, maybe even sooner, if we continue on our present trajectory. So it is a case, as 16-year-old Greta Thunberg recently told delegates at the World Economic Forum in January of this year, our house is on fire. So, as you know, we're already seeing the impacts of climate change, and not only in small island nations like Samoa and Vanuatu, but across industrialized nations and globally. So, for example, the Arctic has seen warming of 2 to 3 degrees higher than the global average. Australia's heat waves that have been occurring this summer have killed a third of the country's flying fox bats, which is a vulnerable species that's already endangered. Global phytoplankton levels are down 50%, and globally, species are being lost 1,000 times faster than natural extinction rates. Of course, the picture is more complex than this, for sure, and there are some signs of hope. Since 2010, the costs of producing electricity from solar photovoltaic systems has decreased by more than 80%. Wind and solar now vie with natural gas to provide new electricity generating capacity. And for some people, they see these trends as signaling the world's latest energy transition, right? Away from fossil fuels and toward a renewable future. But these historical changes in the energy system have been a matter of addition, not transition. Although the percentage shares of biomass, coal, and oil in our energy supply have certainly fallen with the rise of energy alternatives like renewables, their total use continues to grow. So, despite widespread agreement about the need for rapid action on climate change, critical questions still remain about how to make such social, technological, and political change happen. Limiting global temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050 requires carbon emissions to fall by more than 65%. As you might imagine, profound energy system changes are required to achieve this, challenging contemporary structures, systems, mindsets, and cultures. In his national bestseller, The Ingenuity Gap, Professor Thomas Homer Dixon argues that as the complexity, unpredictability, and pace of events in our world increases, and the severity of global environmental stresses on our society escalates, we're going to require increased ingenuity. Homer Dixon speaks of ingenuity as sets of instructions that tell us how to arrange the constituent parts of our social and physical worlds in ways that help us to achieve our goals. He talks about ingenuity as coming in two distinct forms, social and technical. Technical ingenuity helps us to solve problems in our physical world, right? Things like requirements for housing, food, and transportation. And typically, this is what we think about when we think about ingenuity, right? Technologies and techniques that we develop and implement. On the other hand, social ingenuity helps us to arrange our economic, political, and social affairs and design our public and private institutions to achieve the level and the kind of well-being that we desire. Homer Dixon argues that social ingenuity is actually a critical key prerequisite to technical ingenuity. We need social ingenuity to design and set up well-functioning markets. We need it to create market incentives to produce an adequate flow of new technologies. We need competent bureaucrats to design and deliver effective institutional arrangements that are suited to their context. And we need empowered people in communities, whether that be cities or rural places, even households, to also build institutions and programs and to participate in both those institutions and government programs, and to change their behaviors to solve the problems that they face. So I think that most people at a fundamental level really understand that technology alone is not going to solve the worsening environmental problems we face, and it's not going to ensure that we have an energy transition. And I get that feeling by, certainly many examples I see, and I'm going to tell you about one of them. So in 2017, over 3,800,000 individuals participated in a national dialogue on Canada's path to a low-carbon economy. It was sponsored by Natural Resources Canada. And the key values that they identified for directing the path forward included the following. These Canadians asked for bold action and at times experimentation to reach our long-term energy goals. There was unanimity in stressing the importance of collaboration between governments, civil society, industry, Indigenous peoples, and citizens. They talked about the need to improve transparency to provide positive discussion on what's required to support a low-carbon economy. These Canadians were clear about the need to conserve resources, about the need for much more energy-efficient practices, to protect our air and water, and to mitigate climate change. They also recognized that in a nation as large and diverse as Canada, that Canadians do not face the same realities when it comes to energy. And so certainly they saw this diversity as an issue to be addressed or solved, but they also recognized that the diversity we have in our nation is also a strength that we can leverage. Of paramount importance was respect for Indigenous rights and the engagement of Indigenous peoples in energy development and decision-making. And they talked about ensuring equal access to affordable energy and distribution of the costs of the energy transition through inclusive governance and decision-making processes, and by sharing employment opportunities related to the energy transition. Finally, the Canadians declared that they want a resilient energy system that's both safe and secure. As a part of these dialogues, these hundreds of thousands of Canadians also indicated that they consider democratization of electricity to be a priority issue. These citizens want more say in the production, movement, and use of energy. So I'd argue, as I think many people, including Annie, that one of the key ways to address many of these values and principles and to mobilize an energy transition is achieved through developments and increased support for community energy. Community energy refers to renewable energy development, renewable energy generation, actually, that's owned by and or governed by people who benefit through employment, local use, and economic returns. Now, often folks speak about community energy as being locally placed, and they mean that not only in terms of geography, right? That's a project that's in my community, and that it's at a scale that's appropriate for my community, but they also mean that in terms of ownership, decision-making, and benefits. Community energy involves local participation, and it generates collective benefits. These grassroots energy initiatives are strategically important in transitioning to a sustainable society, not only because they result in emission reductions and reduce air and water pollution, but also because these projects engage people where they live. Community energy allows citizens to invest their savings at home, it mobilizes local capital, and it strengthens the local economy. And as citizens participate in the energy system, they become more informed and involved overall, which in turn supports more democratically governed and equitable communities, and thereby strengthens community resilience. Now, I think that we have great potential to scale up community energy in a big way in this province for two key reasons. And I'm going to go through the first one here about resources. And then I'll explain this slide because it doesn't really relate to what I'm going to say. So as most of you know, Southern Alberta is home to some of the highest quality and most easily accessible wind resources. And we have certainly some other locations throughout the province that can be used for wind energy. So that's, one form of resources. And as many of you, including me, have heard many times in this very room, we have some of the best solar resources in all of Canada here in Alberta. And the province's climate is also ideally suited to this source of energy since solar photovoltaics operate more efficiently in cold weather. As well, significant opportunities exist for bioenergy projects in this province, both in terms of the crop and livestock industries. And so when I was talking to Alec, he said that sometimes we get people here who are fairly new, and that it's often a good thing to kind of introduce them to some resources that are out there to give them something to go and look up. And so I've included the URLs for these two resources from the Pembina Institute. One's a map and one's a guide for developing community energy. And if you haven't taken a look at them, I encourage you to do so. Alberta also has a history in populism and energy cooperatives. Until the late 1940s, most rural Alberta residents had no access to electricity as the utility companies had declined to service these underpopulated areas. And in response, as these pictures illustrate here, rural farmers and citizens formed 416 member-owned rural electrification cooperative associations. Those are the REAs that Annie mentioned, to provide electricity to members' farms and communities. As well, Alberta is home to the 4th and 5th largest cooperatives in all of Canada in the form of the United Farmers of Alberta and the Calgary Cooperative Association. And we have 31 credit unions with total system assets of more than $23 billion and 637,000 members. So, I think we have a lot to build from to scale up community energy. But humankind is facing an increasing risk of coinciding failures, arising from multiple stresses acting powerfully at multiple levels of our social, economic, and biophysical systems. At the moment, these stresses are acting in the background, silently eroding the resilience of these systems. The danger is that they will reach a crisis point simultaneously. So far, we've largely ignored these problems, or we've spent time refining our institution, practices, and technologies to increase their performance and efficiency. But if we want to address these wicked issues, to really address them, and to close the ingenuity gaps we face in a fast-changing world, we need to reform our human systems. We need to supply more and better ingenuity, for sure, for more and better technology and more and better institutions, no doubt about that. But we also need greater empathy, cooperation, and humility. We need to reintroduce some prudence into our collective consciousness and learn how to work better together. In terms of creating an energy transition, I think this means we need to focus much more on supporting community energy and the collective learning and praxis it engenders. Thanks.
Albertans want to be leaders in renewable energy. That's why the Government of Alberta has committed $200 million over 20 years in Climate Leadership Plan funds to launch Alberta's Community Generation Program. Community generation helps groups like municipalities, universities, Indigenous communities, and nonprofits partner together or with private developers on small-scale renewable energy projects. These projects can include wind, biomass, hydro, solar, and other renewable technologies. Projects benefit communities socially, environmentally, or economically, such as creating local jobs or local training opportunities. Making it easier for communities to participate in renewable energy projects means more investment in the province, support for local jobs, a diversified economy, and reduced greenhouse gas emissions. Community generation refers to renewable energy that is connected to the distribution system and provides benefits to communities. Participation in community generation projects gives Albertans the ability to produce renewable energy and generate revenue by selling electricity to the grid. For example, an Indigenous community could partner with a private company to build a solar farm to generate revenue by selling electricity to the grid. To allow flexibility, there is no formal size limit on community generation projects. Projects must be sized to fit within the limits of the local distribution system. The program will support a contract for difference model that guarantees a rate of return for electricity production over the long term, locking in a rate for generators. $200 million in provincial funding will make investment in community-scale renewable energy projects possible by guaranteeing the price Albertans receive for the power they produce. The Community Generation Program will improve access to low-cost financing by providing revenue certainty, opening the doors to new projects that will support community benefits, increase investment, and create local jobs. Communities wanting to generate their own electricity through a small-scale renewable energy project will have long-term revenue certainty for the power they generate and export to the grid. Eligible groups include, but are not limited to, societies, condominium corporations, cooperatives, educational institutions, First Nations, Métis settlements, municipalities, and nonprofit organizations. To qualify as a community generating unit, projects must demonstrate social, economic, and/or environmental benefits to the community, like training and development opportunities, contributions to a community endowment fund, or development of community infrastructure. More detailed program criteria will be provided once the application process for the Community Generation Program is established. This program is anticipated to launch in fall 2019. The Community Generation Program opens doors to exciting new small-scale projects while supporting communities as they seek sustainable ways to meet their energy needs. Is your community interested in participating? Visit efficiencyalberta.ca/comgen or email comgen@efficiencyalberta.ca to submit an expression of interest and receive future program updates. Program experts will be available in communities across Alberta in early 2019 to share details about the program. 2019 Community Generation Roadshow stops include Stony Plain, Red Deer, Edmonton, High Level, Vegreville, Hanna, Okotoks, Calgary, Canmore, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Fort McMurray, Grand Prairie, and Grand Cache. The Government of Alberta will also launch a community generation hotline in 2019 that communities can call into for more information.
So I'm looking at LED, and I'm also looking at, of course, solar, because they go hand in hand. The more LED you have, the less solar that you need. When I look at communities, and I talked to the minister very, very briefly, and with the grants being, you have to have your grants in by the 22nd, and I guess I'll send an email. If I was to approach my community and say, we're going to put in 15 houses, we're going to put 10 kilowatts on each house, would that be considered one application? Would that be considered 20 applications? Because it's through a community venture mandated or sponsored by the community.
So you're going to create a corporation or a cooperative like SPICE?
No, it would be through the community. So would the community be a SPICE in all intents and purposes?
Okay, so I'm going to first say that I don't represent the government, okay? But I've been playing this space long enough that I probably understand the regulation as well as most people in the government, or the intent of it. So they're trying to actually create this community generation program, okay? And it's intended to be completed in the fall. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to apply in this current grant application, okay? This grant here is actually more for organizations like ours, which were previous grant recipients, okay? So this is just like a continuation of what we were already doing. We're probably going to get out ahead of most of the other groups, which is fine, except for, you know, Green Cat, who's been playing in the space already. They've made lots of changes that are kind of simultaneous. The large one is the small-scale generation regulation. This is a new thing, okay? And community generation will be underneath that umbrella. Typically, the AUC, once there's a regulation that's enacted, then the Alberta Utilities Commission creates what they call rules. So if you're familiar with microgeneration, the rules, Rule 24, it outlines what the application is, what the appeal process is, you know, all these kinds of things. What the application form is, something simple like that. None of this has been done yet for the small-scale generation regulation, okay, and so this has to happen. It typically takes 6 to 8 months. So if you think about it that way, you won't even really be able to apply until August under the small-scale generation regulation, okay? And so you can start to imagine the timeline. The community generation is intended to be funded by 2021, I think is when the initial funds are coming out. The $200 million that's talked about is for 20-year contracts. Okay, so even though it's said that it's $200 million over 20 years, it's actually, it's one opportunity to bid your community generation projects in for a contract of difference, which will last them for 20 years. And so there's going to be $200 million available for that, okay, if that makes sense.
And it does, and I thank you for that, because that gives us some time to take a look at that. I'm going to just ask one more question, and I'll pass it on. I've had an application in now through, and it's only, I think it's less than 3 kilowatts. It's been sitting on, waiting for approval from our local provider for 18 months. Does the government have, or the government will have, any bite to say, listen guys, we need to get this, we've dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's, we still cannot get, and I cannot hook up my wind generator, and it scares me that I want to put in, I've got 15 people that want to put in 10 kilowatts of power on their homes, and it scares me that I waited 18 months for 3 kilowatts, and I still haven't got approval.
Do you know which territory you're in? Who's DFO?
ATCO.
Okay, well, that's your first problem. But you're doing it through the microgeneration regulation? Yeah. It surprises me that you would be 18 months. It doesn't surprise me that it's ATCO, but it surprises me that it would be 18 months. That doesn't seem, have you tried to appeal to the AUC? They can't, so if you apply through the microgen, they actually cannot refuse it. It just goes to appeal, okay?
Well, I've just, Blue Quails University, and I'm not sure if you've heard about them, they put in 75 kilowatts of power. They've been sitting for 6 months, still not has been turned on. And we're talking 75 kilowatts, which basically, right. And I haven't followed it in, and I suppose I should, and now that I've got some email addresses, I'm going to be pushing emails, but the issue that I see is not that people can do and want, It's we have a kind of a break between our providers, we're at the top, we're at the bottom, and everybody that wants to do on the top.
I wanted just to say two things. One of them is if the government doesn't hear about those issues that you may have, then it's hard for them to work with the ATCO and the Fortis in making it to. And the other thing is, I don't know how many people have heard a presentation around PACE, the program that municipalities are going to be able to loan money to individual property owners to put renewal on their property, and then they will be repaying the loan through property tax, right? So there are different programs for different need. The community generation, what is very appealing to me is that a group of 15 households could get together and form the St. Paul Spice Co-op or whatever, and go through the same exercise and so on. And there's also another tool which the government has put in forward, which is the Community Economic Development Corporation, which Spice is using, that also can empower community generation through the ability to access capitals from RSPs and other instruments. So I think we have to look around at the community generation and similar kind of program, as the government has been building the building blocks for something like this. There were so many things that needed to be done in the electricity generation to allow renewables to become a bigger part of either individual or community generation.
Hi guys, how you doing? My question was about, say, virtual metering in the sense of a community, a condo association has 100 units on their building, and then they want to be able to, say, all the homeowners in that community, in that condo, be able to, say, put $5,000 towards a solar farm somewhere else in the middle of nowhere, and have virtual metering, I guess, for whatever the power is produced out there gets transferred to their condo association's building, you know, via their retailer, if you want to call it that. Is that coming down the pipe to be able to do?
So, yes, but in probably a different way. So the small-scale generation regulation, which is where the community generation is going to lie, will allow a contract for differences, as it said in here. For most people, that's, I can try and explain a little bit of that. It's really a power purchase agreement, so that you basically are buying the power at a certain price. If say you project needs 10 cents a kilowatt hour over 20 years in order to pay for the project, and the current price is 5 cents a kilowatt hour, then the government's willing to pay that 5 cents difference, okay?
Nice.
On the understanding that the market price, if you want to call it market price, the market price for electricity is likely going to increase over that 20 years. And so let's say after 10 years it hits 10 cents, which is your strike price. So then there's no compensation from the government. And if it continues to climb and hits 15 cents, then the project actually pays the government back the difference, okay? So the idea is that over a 20-year period, maybe it's a wash, okay? They put the money up front to get the projects going and get them to move. And once everything starts to move, then, you know, hopefully the economics of the market come in and take the burden off, the risk off the government. So if you have a project, you could slice it up in such a way that you're selling multiple power purchase agreements to multiple parties. And so you could do it in such a way that a tenant of an apartment could have an electricity contract, which is a portion of your project. Okay, it's not technically virtual net metering, but it's a way of doing it, and the project could flow everything through a particular retailer. And in Alberta, you have the option of picking any retailer out there. And so even though it's you live here in Edmonton, lots of people have their electricity retailer as NMAX, which is the Calgary company. So the company doesn't have to be here physically. So if your solar project was located somewhere, you could sell all the electricity through a particular retailer, and people could buy just pieces of it. It's a way of doing quasi-virtual net metering.
So that's a better project then, I think, because it's got a cost for differences then.
It's possible. It's possible. The difference between it and the microgen does avoided costs, and so it's after the meter, and so you're not paying delivery charges. Okay, so this is the T&D, as Calum mentioned. The T&D is really the elephant in the room in Alberta. This is why I hate to use the term market price for electricity. There's nothing market-driven about this. You would never do online shopping if you had to pay $1,000 for a $10 pair of shoes to be shipped to you. And so this economics doesn't actually make any sense. And this is a huge challenge for what we're trying to do. Okay.
Yep, thanks.
One of the other challenges that I'm facing is I install, I'm a master electrician, have been for many years. The challenge I have right now, and it's the same challenge that I'm seeing in the solar, is that we have multiple levels of government. I have 9 levels of government, or call it government, quasi-government, when I need to talk to somebody that can say, let's change the lighting in our hospitals or our schools. It's slowly coming about. Is there anything going to be put in place? Because I understand that there are some schools that are on this year to be able to put in solar. But as an individual paying taxes, when I look at the power bill for a school or a hospital, which is my tax money going in there, why would the government not be forward and upfront saying we're changing our hospital? Yes, I know it's a big bill. I've done probably 40 quotes, and what I'm seeing is on 114 fixtures, I'm seeing a $3,000 or $4,000 savings. So we're not talking, so now if we're putting in solar and we're using old technology on lighting, it doesn't make any sense. But the problem is I can't get through the 9 levels of government to have somebody say, oh yeah, we're paying the power, let's reduce the power consumption, because that's what we're all talking about, is reducing the power consumption.
Okay. So, climate leadership, which the government has taken, it's something that affects every part, not only of government, but municipalities, school boards, which run schools, not-for-profits, churches, everything, right? The whole idea is to change the way that we run our buildings to make them more energy efficient, and also the way that the kind of electricity we consume, so we can consume more renewable energies, right? So there's been a lot of work being done, and it's been done through sectors. Right? So for example, the fact that all new schools that are being built now are very much energy efficient. If you go and see the new schools that are being built, there's 2, in my writing, they have solar panels, everything is energy efficient, it's green building, and so on. So it's been the change that this government has undertaken since 2015. When we're talking about retrofitting, it's a whole different area, and it's very massive, and it may not be perfect. But I think the key message is that every institution, be it small like a church or a not-for-profit, can participate in some way in reducing their energy consumption and into looking at using more renewable form of energy. And I think that's a key message, and it's really been done in conjunction with community members who've been pushing it, right? So I always like to encourage people, especially if you're invested in the solar energy, to really ask some tough questions of your local institutions, your municipalities, or the curling club, the local arena, because actually as of today, there's specific incentive for the ag societies that run most of the curling clubs and the ice arenas throughout Alberta, right? So we've tried sector by sector to provide conditions for buildings to be retrofitted and for new buildings to be more green and to reflect interest in renewable energy. So.
Yeah, and I would just, reiterate that don't forget about the energy efficiency of Alberta. Okay, this is a single point of contact for most people within the province. And so this is really the concept behind the entire agency, is to eliminate a lot of that stuff. So a lot of these programs are actually flowing out through the EEA. Okay, they might start the particular ministry and they might be levels of government. Okay, but this is one of the reasons that they're created the agency to start with. Okay, they're creating now a contractor program so that you can become part of their what they're calling their ePro network. Okay, when PACE comes into fruition, PACE is going to be administered to them as well, and so it is really intended to be kind of a one-stop shop of pushing this stuff through. Okay, and it really, to your point, I think it's been recognized that it requires a more focused approach. And so this is really what the Energy Efficiency Alberta is for. Okay.
So my question is about the compatibility between microgeneration and community generation. So let's suppose, for example, I've got 50 buildings with south-facing roofs on them at a nice slope, and and any of those could install microgeneration and generate their own electricity and use it using that system. But maybe they've got excess capacity on the roof, and they could put more panels on than they would be allowed to under the microgeneration rule. Could they also do sort of a combination of microgeneration and community generation?
Yes. So for the rest of the crowd who may not be familiar with this, so we've had microgeneration regulation in Alberta since 2008. It's intended to basically offset your consumption. And so it's known as an avoided cost model. But it's free, and it's easy, relatively simple to apply for, and stuff like that. But the challenge with it is that it's been capped at your consumption. And it's really only applied for areas that have a consumption load. So if you have just a field of grass, they're not using any electricity, a little hard to put microgen there. So they made a change a couple of years ago where if you own the field and yet you consume somewhere else, you could then combine the two together. So they've been chipping away at that a bit. Well, now along comes small-scale generation regulation, and this is intended to be a different animal. There's no limitation on your consumption. Okay, you can have a field with no consumption and put an array there and generate electricity and sell it into the grid. Okay, so this is the concept behind it. Now the community generation will be built underneath that. So within that regulation, there'll be a specific community generation, and the community generation program is unique in that the balancing pool will pay for the contract for difference. Okay, you can work within the small-scale generation regulation. If you find anybody can sign a power purchase agreement with a generator and pay whatever you like for electricity, and you can have solar projects. Okay, but the community generation is intended for the government to provide the risk and the backstop to it. Okay, so within that, there's going to be an important component which Calum kind of spoke to. It's what they're calling a community benefit agreement. And so when you have a project and you want to do one under the community generation regulation, you have to submit it along with the community benefit agreement. Okay, and so this is where the differentiation becomes, because it doesn't have to be solely economic. It could be a community benefit component to it. So Calum spoke to that a bit with some of the projects they've done, and I can pass the mic to him so he can elaborate on it a bit. But this is the big difference between community generation and just electricity generation. So this has a community benefit. Okay. So, I don't know. Do you want to?
The only slight thing I would add to that is it's going to be very interesting what the government do in terms of evaluation. The CFD's model as it's set up is due to be a competitive bid. So weightings for community benefits and just how that's evaluated will be interesting to see when the program's finalised. I personally don't envy the task that some people have in trying to get that right. Yeah, no, that's pretty much all I was going to say.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind with the community generation is that wind is a lot cheaper than solar. And so if you want to see solar generation occur, there'll probably have to be weighting within the evaluation for that as well. Because on pure economics, it's going to be wind. But you can't put wind in every community, okay, and in every situation. And so to Calum's points, this is evaluating the projects, deciding which is the better than the others. It's not going to be done on pure economics. There has to be a formula to calculate how all this works out, okay? It's a tricky one. It's a really tricky one, especially when you do it the first time, right? So.
Hi. I was wondering, how do you quantify the limits of funds available to a project? And also, are projects ranked by feasibility as to which ones receive funding?
So I think I can be really honest in saying that this is a work in progress, and the government is still in the learning phase, and in working with all of you, you know, and people obviously like Lauren and Calum that have a lot of experience in terms of making good decisions around projects. And I don't have the details of the criterias or the scales and so on, but if you're interested, I'm sure I can get the information for you of what's been happening. But feasibility and how it matches the criteria that the government wants to achieve around the community generation, and then in terms of the money, there's $200 million in the budget for those years of that the program's initially set. So when the money's exhausted and less more money has been put up into the program, there's zero into the budget part of for the community generation. Was that? Yeah. So the money is in the budget. You said 2021 when they might write the check. So once that $200 million is finished, that's it. Unless the new government puts in more money in the budget for it.
So, sorry, so competition amongst different projects is not a factor?
I think one of the links in the slides that I have up will take you to the ComGen website. Within the ComGen website, within the program for the capacity building, there's a 10-point scoring breakdown, effectively, which is weighted from 1 to 5 for each category. Decisions will ultimately be made, I would assume, on a comparison between scoring and the value that's applied for. I'm making a bit of an assumption.
I think geography and the community, the validity of the project and the geography, the community benefit that results from it, the technical aspect of it will all be used as weight, right? So you probably, if there's 2 projects in St. Paul's, for example, then it's obvious that the project that scores the highest will be chosen. But if it's a project in St. Paul's and one in Medicine Hat or one in I don't know, Fort Mac or Grand Prairie, then they're not going to be competing with each other. But they will be competing for the technical feasibility, but not geographically.
Yeah. The other thing to note there is my understanding from attending some of the roadshows is that there's effectively 2 pots of money currently available, one administered by MCCAC. I am not going to expand on that because I cannot remember.
Municipal Climate Change Action
Center. Great.
I don't
Thank
know
you
what
very
the
much.
LLC stands for. Actually,
so they're effectively looking after the pool for the MDs, and EEA will be looking after for everybody else that's applying in. The other thing that was noted is that the money available under the capacity building piece is ring-fenced from the 200 million that's available for the actual generation programme. So it's a small additional pool. Please correct me if I'm wrong in saying that. It's the information we've had from the government anyway.
So the important thing I think that I've learned in the last little while is that they actually haven't made a lot of the final decisions, as Annie was trying to say, because they're waiting to do true stakeholder engagements. There's little point in going around the province and asking you, the citizens of Alberta, what you would like if you've already made up your mind. Okay? And so they've laid out this kind of broad concept and are asking for input. So this is why they're traveling around the province, having all these stakeholder engagements, the roadshow, and then they're going to have some further stakeholder engagements. And this is why they're setting the fall of 2019 as kind of the point in which they're going to have this kind of program in place. They've also just hired, the EA's just hired a project coordinator to manage this as well. Okay, and they didn't want to make a lot of decisions before they had this person in place because they wanted this person to help develop this as well. Okay, so it's kind of fluid at the moment. So it's not that we don't know. I have some ideas that I would like to see implemented. You probably have some ideas. Calum probably has some ideas, but we don't actually know what it's going to be. All that I can see is that they're trying. The concept is there. They're trying to flesh this out, and they're going to the communities and saying, okay, we want to do community generation. We have an idea what that means. What does that mean to you? Okay, and come back. All right. As you can appreciate, EPCOR thinks that they do community generation and have for decades. Okay, so because they've been taxpayer owned for years. Okay, so it depends on who you talk to as to what they think community generation means. And so there's a lot to this topic. Okay, but to be fair to the government, I think I don't mind it terribly in that they haven't cut anybody out. It's open to everybody. Okay, come in, bring your ideas. Let's see what you've got. And so it's kind of an innovative concept that way. Okay, rather than the government saying, "This is community gen. If you don't like it, there's the door." Right? And so it's a bit difficult for some of us trying to do stuff in this field because there's no finish line at the moment. But from the greater community, I think it's not a bad process either. Okay.
I think that's very, very fair, and I mean it's across everything. So the current remit for community projects that are larger than a megawatt is to apply under Rule 7. Which, if you're a 1.2 megawatt solar farm on land that has no value, is overly onerous. So I think the engagement piece with industry as well as with communities is imperative to make sure that these small projects don't end up carrying really high front-end costs, which makes it prohibitive to move forward with them. And I think that's something that the government are looking to engage in and take feedback on, which it's good news for everyone.
We will take one last question.
Hello. I was just wondering about the RECs and how they tie into this whole program as well.
Okay. So RECs have a role, carbon offsets. So you can sell electricity, you can sell the RECs, you can sell the carbon offsets. However, if you go through the true community generation program, my expectation is that the government will own the green attributes, as they do with the current rebate program through the EEA. So my expectation is that they're prepared to take the risk through a contract of differences, okay? Due to that, they own the green attributes, okay? But it doesn't mean you can't do a project that's similar through other regulations like Calum is mentioning, and then you've got the RECs and everything else you can sell for it, okay?